Professor Lindahl from Linköpings University will give us the latest view about the circular economy. He has been working at a global level with the standardization of the circular economy, but also deep diving into the challenges. And just recently published also a model or a new view of the importance of detoxification in the circular economy.
Really happy to be here and have a quite condensed presentation, but it will be available after this presentation. I've been working in this area for now soon 30 years, and I've seen a lot of things happening. The awareness is higher now, and I think that is good. I've been working with companies. I will have more of a solution perspective in my presentation. And but I will take a step back and actually have a historical review. Why we ended up in this situation? Why do we have this problem? And if we go back in time, we were living in a society that lacked resources. And the resources we had in possession was quite simple, not that advanced. We had iron, we had wood, and all the resources we had to guard ourselves, basically, and then we had to make the products. But over the time, we have developed, today our products are more complex, and I just give an example here with bikes. We have also more advanced materials, and because we managed, due to the Industrial Revolution, being able to access. And we've gone from this idea of, in the old days, we made products that would be easy to repair, share, durable, etc., into something else. And I will come back to why we ended up into something else. We have gone from quite simple manufacturing like this into very, very complex value chains, and that is relying upon that fact that we have different actors doing different things, very, very complex. And we have tried to optimize our production. And one way to optimize the production and the creation of products is actually to make also more advanced materials and more complex materials. And we have also much more of a mix of the different materials. When we had this Industrial Revolution kicking in, we continued the idea of making products that are durable, etc. But what happens if we continue to sell this type of products? We get secured markets. And in the 19th century, and in the beginning of 1910, there started to be a big concern among factory owners and also politicians. What will happen if we have a lot of people that are suddenly they don't have any job in the factories, and a lot of factories closing down? We need to keep society calm and nice, and we need to keep the factories ongoing. And how to do that? A lot of thinkers were called in, and I used to talk about this guy when I have my presentations because he is quite not well known. This is Victor Lebow. He had a big influence on the automotive industry, but in UK and US, but the industry itself had a big impact on the rest of society. And he summarized his ideas of how to make things and the factories ongoing in this article and this quote. And he stated that our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. The American way, the American dream. And at the time, I mean, no one could see and understood the environmental consequences. But from a employment perspective, a factory perspective, this was good, and societal perspective. And we started to shape our society to actually making this as efficient and effective as possible. And as a consequence, we had this ladder of lead and zinc thinking. We should actually, in the old days, we were focusing on prevention, reuse, and recycling. Now it was a focus on actually landfill and incineration. It was even plans that it should be legally not allowed to own products more than a few years. Then it should be destroyed. And we can also see that I mentioned that we have tried to optimize the products, and Matthew mentioned very good there. more complex materials, and just to optimize the production. We're not really thought about what will happen later on. And a lot of things will happen later on. For example, with microplastics, when plastics are broken down. But it's not only plastic, there are a lot of other materials. I will come back to that later on. And we have a lot of then materials ended up in this. From quite sorted materials, and then we spread it out in society, and suddenly we have just a big mix. And contaminations. And I will use this, the butterfly diagram. How many of you have seen this before? Few of you. I will use it in a different way. And when Ellen MacArthur Foundation presented this, a lot of people thought, okay, we should have more loops. And I think that because I talked with Ken Webster, one of the founding father of the concept and ideas, that was not their idea. It was actually to have fewer loops. And the loops should be as close as possible. Because every loop increases the risk, and the longer the loops, of unwanted material accumulation. And also losses. I forgot to mention that. Losses, that you have losses in the system. So I think that is also a problem. But if we look into society, what we have is more and more of longer, more risky loops in society, making it harder. And we have also have tendency to forget one important thing, and I'll try to explain this in a very, very quick way. Because when talking about circular economy, it's quite easy to understand we will never end up in a complete 100% circular economy. It's not even wanted from a environmental perspective. And I think that is important, but what we can do is move towards as circular as possible by optimizing and doing things. And I'll come back to one way we could do in order to achieve this. And just give an example. Let's say you have running shoes, and then you have 100% of new production of running shoes. Then you will end up on the left side of this figure. Then we try to have 100% recycling. Then we'll end up on the right side in this figure. But in order to have this 100% recycling in theory, then we need to run along the roads, etc., where we have been running, picking up all the atoms in order to be able to actually have 100%. But then what we have forgotten is that we also need a system for creating this circulation, reuse. And that system itself will require resources. A system that itself not necessarily circular. So what we can do is try to optimize. We will have a minimum here. But what we can do by doing certain things, we can, for example, redesign a zone, make it easy to take back, easy to recycle, easy to reuse, and then move this minimum towards the right. I hope you understand the figure. And so, we have this society, and then I will go to the next, because now we have a problem in society in general. That problem is that we continuously focus on making things more efficient. And that is good, but it should never be the starting point. And we have built a society that is trying to make the traditional business model of selling things as efficient as possible. But as I mentioned, it should not be the starting point. The starting point should always be, what is the most effective thing to do? What is the right thing to do? And then we should make that efficient. This implies that we might need to change our way of doing things. Not just making the recycling a little bit more efficient. Maybe we should take a step back, rethinking the whole way of doing it. And that links to Peter Drucker, that stated the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. So what we need to do is rethink and don't use the logic that Victor Lebov and his fellows wanted us to use. And one way, the starting point, is to actually rethink this one, the ladder of Lansing. Because we know that the best is on the top, prevention, and the worst is landfill. We should also think about actually changing it. We should change it not from the waste hierarchy, actually talk about the resource pyramid. Resource, because resource is something nice. That is something we want to work with. Waste is boring. And if you start to think about it, waste is actually a resource. Now, I don't have time to go into it, but in the new standard for circular economy, we are actually defining waste from a resource perspective, not up the other way around. Circular economy is a concept that has been growing. And in short, this is from the new standard about circular economy, where I've been actually heavily involved in crafting. And we are talking about the circular economy is an economy that uses a systemic approach to maintain a circular flow of resources by recovering, retaining, or adding to the value while contributing to sustainable development. So the focus is here on value, to keep the value high, because without value, it makes sense to actually circulate things. And I think this is important. A lot of companies are interested in this, and I would say not from an environmental perspective. Sorry to say, environmental things are positive, a bonus, but it's because this is in line with what they have always been trying to do, actually create as much value as possible with as little resources and losses as possible over time. But you see they can do it in another way if they also start to change the business model, focusing on the function, service, during the use, not just selling the products. In order to do so, you also need to think in a different way, and that the concept circular economy can be misleading. A lot of people are thinking, okay, we should take back, etc., thinking about turning back. But I used to say that circular economy is not about sending resources back. It's actually sending them back to the future. And I think this is important because what we now place on the market as resources or products, we need to have an idea how in the future we can handle and treat those in a smart way. That implies, in some cases, you also have time to prepare for how to do it, but we need already now, when designing, for example, the materials, think about how can then later on be done. In the standard, we also have developed some principles, and I must then mention that it has been more than 1,000 experts around the world, more than 100 countries involved in this work, crafting those principles. That is actually based on research, a lot of research. And of course, systemic thinking is always important, but then we also need to have this value creation and value sharing in a different way. Because in order to make this circulation doable, it might be that we need to share values from the benefits we can get from the system with other actors needed in the system. Otherwise, it will not happen. But we also need to improve our resource stewardship and resource traceability over time. I know it's a lot of text, but you have the text later on. So I think this is important, but we also need to have a broader perspective. We can't just look into value chains. We also need to look into value networks to understand how resources are flowing in society, and also have more communication over time and with other actors. We also need to go back to the basic principles, strategies that once upon a time were actually of natural reasons needed. Think about actually refuse. Do I really need to have this product? To think, reduce, reuse, etc., and take them back. And they make sense in a more circular economy where you're not just selling the products, but actually are focusing on the provided value over time. When mentioning those, I also want to stress one thing, because I've heard so many people misunderstanding this. They think I should only pick one of these, but actually what you should do is try to combine them. Just because you are focusing on refusing or rethinking doesn't mean that you should not also take in consideration repairing, refurbishing, etc. So try it as an organization, but also together with your value network, value chain, think how can we do this in the smartest way? Rethinking things. Then we also need to think about how how the flow of resources are going in our society. This is from a report that ICC published, and Per, you were heavily involved in. This is a model that shows how we should think about resources in our society and how things are flowing. Because it's during the use phase we actually get the value from something. But it's normally also during the use phase we have the main environmental impact from something. But what we should try still is anyway to keep the use phase as long as possible by different types of means. For example, maybe repair, refurbish, remanufacturing, repurpose. We should really try to avoid this, the fact that we need to dispose something. But when trying to optimize this, we still need to think about the resources needed for this, the different activities like refurbishment. Because in doing that, it might be that we need to take out some components, some materials, because otherwise the product will be contaminated, the one we are using. So we should take out the unwanted resources from our material flows, but we should try to keep as clean flows as possible. I will come back to that in a few seconds because I have a lot of things to say and I would like to say. But so try to keep the flows as clean as possible, but we can't neglect the fact that the system itself also needs resources to be operating. I will give an example, because in order to achieve this, we also need to rethink the way we are selling products and services. And one company that I've been working with since 2003 is Toyota Material Handling. At the time I started work with them, they called BT, and they are located in Miljöföretaget. And this is from the marketing material stating that don't buy trucks. Don't buy trucks. It makes sense to use a fleet of trucks to facilitate efficient material handling, but you don't have to own it to use it. Instead, rent it from us. And that is what they have been focusing on since more than 20 years. In the old days, they wanted to sell as many forklift trucks as possible. But now, instead of selling as many, they are trying to really understand the customer needs, and then they are setting out a fleet of forklift trucks to the customer, and they have gone from rental contracts that were 3 to 5 years up to 10, 12 years. And when the customer don't need the forklift trucks any longer, they are taking the forklift trucks back and refurbishing them, fixing them into new ones, and putting them out for new customers. By doing this, they have a better control of the material flows, resources, and it's in their interest to do different things. So things in a different way. Because what happens if the supplier takes the full responsibility? Traditionally, service and spare parts, important for the profit. But if the supplier takes responsibility, all spare parts becomes a cost, something you want to reduce. And if the offer is not working, for example, malfunctioning, the customer don't pay. And the shift here is the focus is from selling new products to satisfying the customer as long as possible. But that is not everything. Because it also becomes very, very interesting that the materials, the resources you have in the forklift trucks, in this case, are clean, are easy to reduce, and so you can have a high value of the used materials if you can't use it as a product or a component. Big, big change. And they prefer then to use components instead of just scrap it. That's why I think Pyrrolist is not a good solution, maybe in the end. Finally, I will come into, because I'm not too sure about the time, but
it's okay.
I've been involved, and actually I initiated a product some years ago called Unity, because it was a big fuss about the plastic. And I could see that in this sector, it has been very much of a focus, constantly coming up with new formulas, optimizing normally just for the production, with without any consideration of what will happen and what challenges will it be in recycling. And we can see that it's hard if you have 10,000 of different types. It's hard really to sort them out in the end. Do you remember the pile of waste? Mix of a lot of different plastic. It's hard to sort them. And it's a risk that the different plastic will contaminate each other as well. And then the idea was, is it possible to reduce the number of today's thermoplastics? And a lot of people said, no, it's impossible. Definitely not possible. But we actually did a survey within the Swedish plastic sector from the raw material producers to the recycling companies, and to see is it possible. And the idea was actually, instead of having so many, to see could we with fewer, but ones, having ones that actually cover much bigger, can handle a lot of more properties needed for products. And the thing is that then people thought, no, this is good. Even the producer of the plastic material thought this could be good. And interesting thing here, the ones producing products thought this is very, very good because it's quite problematic also handle that many types of plastic in the production. and so the idea of reducing number of additives, have more standardized plastic, was considered to be a good way. And I think this is a way forward in line with what you mentioned, because if you have fewer, we can still have the properties we want, but we don't allow that many different types. And now we are looking into the same thing for actually metals, steel alloys. We have the same problem there. I would say it's even worse. So in summary, conclusions, ensure that resource flows are clearly defined. That is a lesson learned, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a production perspective, business perspective. Turn the ladder of land sink upside down into a resource pyramid. Track resources in society, knowing where they are and when they will become available again. I think this is knowledge that is now lacking. So we can plan future needs. Avoid mixing and combining materials that could contaminate each other. And we have a lot of that nowadays in our society. Creating business models focus on value creation during use rather than based on sales. And finally, standardize and reduce material variations, but develop those that can meet a wider range of performance requirements. So, that I would like to close and take questions. And I also have some links to some reports where you can find more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that the combination of having a resource focus, maybe a right resource pyramid, together with the report you mentioned from ICC. In the beginning of October, I was in Paris and we had a follow-up discussion about the report. And the discussion was that in the model that you have then, it is you together with a colleague that has developed this model. It is in each and every step we have a detoxification element.
Yes.
So it means that you have a qualification, should we use it or not? And this we discussed at ICC is that this can maybe also support us to reduce the challenges we face with the Basel Convention. Basel Convention means that you can't transport hazardous waste. You should keep it. And the problem is if you are free trade and like to trade resources that have been recycled, suddenly the Basel Convention or the waste shipment becomes more complicated. And then, of course, we can't compete with virgin resources. So this model could be a way to convince Basel Convention to say, well, if we have this detoxification step, then it should be free of trading. I don't know, what's your opinion?
I agree, and that's why I thought that this model was important to actually create and show, because there are a lot of things related to this. It's also, now you know that in the European Union, we want to have more of the demanded reuse of material. But then it even becomes more important to have this in mind, because if we are starting to take back, forcing, for example, in plastic, have 30% recycled plastic, it's a high risk that we will actually have accumulations of hazardous substances that from beginning was not hazardous, but when combining, mixing, will become hazardous. And one loop, and then we do it a second loop, a third loop, it can be really, really dangerous if we don't think about this from the beginning, that we need to make some detoxification already in the beginning. And that is about plastic, but then if we look into metals, it could be even worse.
Yesterday at 5 o'clock, European Economic Social Committee, one of two council committees for the Commission. There's regions, I mean, every region in Europe has a seat in that. And then we have the European Economic Social Committee where business and NGOs are included. They come up with a report saying, well, we need to move from waste plants to resource plants. And I send it to you, and what is your reflection, just briefly going through?
Yeah, I went through it briefly, and I think this is, I mean, it's not only me or you talking about this need of changing mindset. This is, I would say, key. Because if I can take just a step back, it's because this is also related to the words we are using. The words are affecting us heavily, how we are thinking and acting. And I will give an example that I normally talk about when having this type of situations. Let's say I sell fluffy, nice white towels, and you're in need of fluffy white towels, and the price is the correct one, for you, correct one. Most likely you could consider buying them from me for that price. But the second I tell you they are second-hand, are you still willing to pay the same price? Most likely not. And you will also be concerned about the quality, because that is something you have learned from childhood. Second-hand should not be considered as having the same price as the new one. At the same time, you have been staying in hotels. I've been staying in a lot of hotels. I've never seen someone going down to the lobby complaining about the fact that they're using second-hand towels that have been used to dry things you don't want to think about, and blankets, etc. So coming back to this about focus on resources, waste is considered to be something negative. If we have waste, people also tend to treat it in a poorer way than if we are handling resources. But so there are a lot of things, layers in this, but it's needed. We need to think about this as a resource, and a resource for the next use phase, and then the next use phase of society.
Back to the report in the end, in the panel discussion, because I have some announcements to do as well. In the end, will happen next with that. I would like to thank you, Professor, and we really like to have you back in the panel.
Thank you.